5 years ago now that I had been treating this lady, and I'd known her for quite some time. She was a repeat patient of mine, and I just realized like something is off here. And she ended up having a benign pituitary tumor, right? Jeez. But like, but the ability now of, before I'd have to pick up my phone and it was me and my boss having a conversation with our two knowledge bases of what else could be going on, where now I can just plug the information in and say, run me a differential diagnosis for this patient.
We have Matt Kearns with us, Director of Revenue Cycle and Analytics at Lattimore Physical Therapy, formerly owner of Brownstone Physical Therapy. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
We want to take it back to the start. Tell us about your educational journey and how you actually got from being a provider to owning a practice in Brownstone Physical Therapy.
Sure. So I think, it really started pretty early on in my career. I had the opportunity when I was probably 17 to go shadow my former boss at the time, which was also at Brownstone Physical Therapy. Shadowed him for a couple days and liked what I saw, and so I was like, yes, this is what I want to do with my life. So went to college for that, graduated from Damon College in 2010 with my doctorate in physical therapy. Immediately took a job at Brownstone, started working there as a provider in 2010, but had previously worked there wiping tables and folding towels and doing anything else they asked me to do when I was going through both high school and college. And so I worked there for probably a year and a half and then decided to teach a little bit. So I taught at Damon College for about 2 years, taught graduate gross anatomy, graduate neuroanatomy, and orthopedic physical diagnosis to PA, PT, and athletic training students. And then after about 2 years, I was settling down with my wife and family, and so I came back to the Rochester area, took over our Newark clinic there as the clinical director in 2013, and then in about 2017 became minority partner in the business, and then in 2023 bought sole ownership of all 3 clinics at the time, and then in 2024 we opened our 4th location, and from there in 2025 we sold the business and were acquired by Lattimore Physical Therapy.
It's a long journey. That's a lot. That's awesome. Talk to us a little bit more, Matt, if you're okay with it too. The specifics of your education side of things. I know you and I have mentioned, or in the past talked a little bit about this, but talk to me about your track record academically and what gave you the opportunity to teach. I mean, not everybody graduates from PT school and then teaches in the program that they came from, and then maybe a little bit more about what you did from a residency standpoint after graduating.
Yeah, sure. So, going through college and PT school, I think that was the point at which I learned, which I kind of knew in high school, but didn't know the degree to which that I had a little bit of a photographic memory, not full photographic memory, but once I had looked at something and ingested it a couple times, I was pretty good at understanding and comprehending the details of it. And so in my 6 years of school, I carried a 3.99 GPA. I got an A- in Irish literature freshman year. It was a junior level class I was taking as a freshman, and so I graduated PT school with top of my class as far as GPA goes. And during my time in PT, I was a teacher or teacher's assistant basically for graduate gross anatomy for 3 years. And so once I graduated, it was kind of a natural progression. They'd asked me if I wanted to come back and help teach a little bit. After I'd been out of college about, I guess it was about 5 years, I applied to be in a fellowship program through the American Academy of Orthopedic Manual Physical Therapists. I completed that in 2015. And so that kind of tacked on the credentials of, physical therapist, and then garnered what they call a diploma in osteopractics, and then became a fellow of the American Academy of Orthopedic Manual Physical Therapists as well on that journey. And so that was kind of my ascent, and then kind of continued learning as a PT. And so that's kind of where we stand today.
It's amazing.
Awesome. So I think one story that I think we both want to hear about is, what does it take to run a practice, own a practice, and then sell a practice? Because I think there's a lot of folks listening that probably have their own practice or are looking to go into perhaps being a majority owner in a practice, but you've seen the full journey, right?
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
we want to hear about that.
Yeah, I think, it was interesting. I think, being a minority business owner, it was exactly that. I was a minority business owner. I was helping in some things, but not all things. And so, we came to a point where it was time to have me really take over everything. And that's really when I started asking questions and self-teaching and trying to delve in everything I could from a, analytical perspective, and that's where I felt like I really needed to get more data at my fingertips. And so through some different avenues and different things, I quickly realized that I needed to be able to have a pretty big suite of information to be able to digest and comprehend and then make, educated business decisions from a financial perspective, but also what was best for, my employees and my patients as well. We kind of early on in my tenure adopted that basically what was best for the patient was best for the practice. And sometimes that comes with taking financial deficit intentionally to continue to foster relationships with people, because in the end, it's really all about relationships, right? And so the gamut of, treating patients 5 days a week and then moonlighting as a business owner, trying to make, comprehensive business decisions that were steering the practice in the right direction, and also managing a staff of, we had 11 PTs and 7 front office people, was really the challenge of it. It went well, it was fun, and it was a learning experience where I think we sort of got 1% better each day. I was fortunate to, come into, by happenstance, a relationship with Athelis where, I had enough data at my fingertips and knew enough about the RCM cycle that I could kind of teach myself that. About 3 months into me being the sole owner, my practice manager left. So I had to basically self-teach myself everything from first claim out the door through denial work to everything else to make sure things were going well. And so at the time, I wasn't very happy about it, but it was an opportunity that really put me in a unique position to both understand the clinician side of it as well as the business side of it. And I think it kind of forced my hand to really look a little closer at the business side of things. And in concert with that, we were also really trying to transform the practice to be patient-centric. And to be patient-centric, we needed more time with the patient, right? And so tools like AI documentation and things like that certainly assisted in giving me some time back and some restoring some work-life harmony, so I could still focus on developing this very patient-centric journey that allowed the maximizing of the patient relationship with the clinician to not just create a one-time patient, but a lifetime patient at our practice that kind of had a journey that was, our goal was to say like, that was different, right? That wasn't the normal healthcare experience where I was a number through the system and nobody really cared about my journey. And so that was kind of where it was. But, from a perspective, going back to the basic question, the ability to start day one as a brand new business owner, really had no idea what they were doing and kind of self-teach along the way. That was a huge self-discovery. And I think, that's when I learned I actually liked analytics a little more than I thought I did and really wanted to use numbers to drive decision making.
Talk to us a little bit more about decision making on like a partner or a mentor, or I know you've obviously paid for some or have gone into business with some partners. Like, how did that process go and how did that influence the journey you just described?
Yeah, I think, the most important thing for me is always that you're not working with the company, you're working with the people. I think so. Anytime we go to look at a partner or choose a mentor, I try to find people who are similar in mind in the thought process that, healthcare is broken, right? Like in a sense that like we at some point decided to put the patient last and not first, right? And really at the heart of the journey, like none of us went to school to fight the insurance company on a denial, to fight about an authorization, to have to worry about, are we going to make payroll this week? We went to school to help people and treat patients. And so really, as I was looking for partners and mentors, from a mentor standpoint, that's what I was looking for, is trying to find a mentor that could help me take the patient and put it back at the forefront of the journey. From a vendor or partnership perspective, really align myself with partners and vendors who were trying to push the envelope and do that same thing, right?
When you then decided that, hey, it was potentially time to sell, or started entertaining those conversations, talk to us about that, because I think a lot of folks today get approached by private equity or by bigger groups. And how did you think through the decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a interesting decision for me at the time because I had been, at it about 2 years. We had just added our 4th clinic to our rotation of clinics, if you will. And so we were at a breaking point where I either was going to have to invest a lot of money to scale a lot more from an HR perspective, from a legal counsel perspective, and all the other things that go with running a business, or look to find a company that was like-minded in the way that they were caring for their patients and doing things, and kind of be acquired. And so for me, the ultimate decision came down to restoring some work-life balance between me kind of moonlighting as the business owner and seeing patients, but also watching my kids' t-ball games, right? And getting to the point where I could be back in those situations. We were at a very interesting inflection point because everything we had done, we were ready to scale, right? We had opened our 4th practice. We had hired no additional administrative personnel to open the practice because we had kind of tied up the RCM side of things, and we could keep opening. But at the other side of the coin was, well, if we keep opening, my role is going to continue to evolve and grow. And so the decision was really largely based upon restoring that work-life balance for myself and my family. And so we found the right people at the right time for me, which was, Lattimore Physical Therapy at the time.
It made sense on why you chose to sell. I'm curious the actual the process of it though, right? Like, so you made the decision, I want to go sell. What do people need to know about like this actual M&A process, right? Like, what are some things that maybe are not as obvious, or things that you learned as you went through it? Because it's a full on acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing to me was that all my people were taken care of, right? And so the first thing I did before I moved any further was made sure that everyone who was in my clinics at the time was going to have the same position they had, was going to have a better, if not equal situation, both financially, monetarily, benefit-wise, and that everyone was going to have the opportunity to continue to grow in the company that we were merging with. So I think that was really step 1. Step 2 was really trying to understand what the practice was worth, right? And so, interestingly, I don't think you guys even know this, there were 2 other groups that had approached me, about, selling and merging and this M&A type of thing too, and they weren't the right fit for me, right? We went through a great deal of the process, and it just wasn't going to be the right fit for me because they couldn't understand the value that I'd established in our communities, right? They were more of a private equity nature, and they were, a little further away than arm's length. The group we decided to go with, which was Lattimore, were really in our backyard, right? We had clinics very close to each other. And so from that standpoint, they understood my value and what I had built and the reputation we had built. And so even today, the Brownstone name is still in the clinics. It's Lattimore Brownstone, right? And so that was important to me as well, to kind of carry on this legacy of what we had built. That Brownstone had been open for 30 years before the merger acquisition, and so those were little intricacies that were important. But so too was I had no idea all the things I was going to have to produce and need to show them. Like, I needed to find all of my malpractice insurance, which I had, but like I didn't know that we were going to need to see that for the merger, and we had to make sure that the revenue we were generating was sustainable, right? Interestingly, the year that I decided to merge was our best year ever, right? And so looking back on it, had I waited one more year and we could have added the last year into it, I probably could have gotten a higher dollar amount for the practice, but the time was right, the conditions were right, and my role was right as well. And so I think those are, things that, we didn't think about as far as like, okay, well, how is this all going to merge together, right? Are we on one platform? We're on separate platforms. For us, luckily, from an RCM perspective, we were already on the Athelus RCM platform. Lattimore was on the Athelus RCM platform. So that made merging the financial part much easier, right? Even now, we're still on a different EMR system. We'll all be on one universal system soon. But, like, can that be sustainable? And can you grow? And so I think that was part of it. I think the other part was really finding someone from a merger acquisition standpoint that could sustain the culture, that we had developed too, and that was going to be a fit, because it wasn't going to be good for anybody if I sold the practice and everybody left, right? Because then I feel bad because I just sold them something that doesn't exist anymore, right? And in the same standpoint, like, I needed to make sure the people who had poured their energy and time into this practice to help me grow it were taken care of as well. And so I think largely it went smoother than I expected, but I've heard some horror stories about mergers and acquisitions that didn't go as smooth. And really that was, at a credit to both Lattimore and I think our practice as well, to really vet that the ideologies, the cultures, the thought processes behind how we take care of people, that the patient is the center of the journey, was really lined up. And so I think those are some of the key things.
Any other key learnings that, again, back to Hirsch's question, someone who's going through something similar, maybe vetting out options or exploring the idea, maybe it's further down the road of, do I want to sell? Do I want to maintain my status? Some people don't even have that option. Sometimes it's like, shoot, do I just need to close the doors? Any other learnings that you would take from the process now that it's done? You mentioned maybe waiting one more year from a financial perspective, vetting out the culture. Anything else you can think of that's like, hey, if I were to redo this, the advice I would give would be what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a very interesting place, right? Because for better or worse, every single year we get cuts to reimbursement, right? And yet every single year the cost of living increases, right? And so I also saw this inflection point coming where I couldn't give the people I was employing probably what they deserved from a salary standpoint, because there just wasn't reimbursement enough. We can only see so many patients in a day, right? And so I think, looking internally and really understanding and forecasting, like, okay, how many patients do we need to see to sustain what we're doing is also probably a key point, right? I was very fortunate to not be at a point where I had to sell, right? I think that's probably the number one thing that I would recommend is, like, I don't think you want to wait until the moment where you don't think you can keep the doors open anymore to then go and say, I need help. I need someone to acquire me. We can't keep the doors open. We're not financially stable, right? And so that's an entire probably different experience. I had enough leverage through the negotiation to say, like, we're good. Like, if we don't do anything today, we're going to be very sustainable. We have good profit margins. We can continue to carry on at this state for several more years, right? And so I think if there's a thought process, right, that you may want to sell or merge or be acquired, like, making sure that your cards are in order and that you're not at a no leverage standpoint, right, because you've waited too long, is probably important. And the other thing too is, probably by luck and happenstance, I spent the better part of the first year in owning the practice solely just creating SOPs, right? And I didn't say it for about 3 months when I first bought the practice, but I didn't even know what SOP stood for, right? And so, standard operating procedures were something that were key and something that probably improves your multiplier, right? Like, you come in and you want to say, okay, well, you have these 4 clinics, right? If all 4 clinics are doing something completely different, that's not going to feel as a big of appetite for someone to acquire you, because there's a lot more legwork to be done. The more turnkey it is, the better. So I think if you're thinking about maybe even working towards this merger acquisition thing, getting your, proverbial ducks in a row, your cards in a row, and making sure everything is in order is probably key, right? Like, fortunately, I was in a spot where we had just done all the SOPs. I had financial information at my fingertips, and I could provide anything anybody really wanted at that moment in time without much lift. And I think that was the easy part for me. But, again, I just think I wouldn't have wanted done it when we were at the end of the road saying, we can't keep going. just give us whatever, right? I watched it happen to a colleague where, you know, they were unfortunately forced out of their building, out of their lease, and had to sell their practice, but they didn't have a practice to sell anymore because they didn't have space, right? And so we just had to clientless at that point. And so I think it never hurts to have a conversation, right? And so if you would have asked me in 2022, I would have said, I will never sell. Brownstone will be a thing until I retire. I'll do this until I retire. This is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. I'll never ever sell, right? But once you start to live it, you understand all the responsibilities and things of that nature. And, you know, the groups were like, that I were talking to had, you know, 6 people in charge of everything that I was doing inherently. And so I think that was an eye-opening experience, you know, as well. But, you know, once we started having the conversations and I understood better, like, what a merger would look like, where that would put me, where that would make me. And I by no means was ready to retire, right? But I had a very fortunate experience to be, for them to kind of invite me in to say, no, we want you to run our RCM department and help shape and mold, you know, where we're going in the future. That was a big deal too. But
yeah. So I it's a great segue, because I think my next question is, you went from overseeing how 4 practices run and really the lifeblood is, you know, how you get reimbursed and how you keep the standard of patient care high while also keeping your doors open, right? I think it's both are important, to now running it for over 35 clinics, right? And think for the folks listening, that's, you know, you almost 10x the size, right, of what you're overseeing, specifically from an analytics and RCM perspective. Talk to us about that transition, because it I'm sure you learned a lot of things that maybe you didn't know about, or maybe you're like, look, we were running things so cleanly at Brownstone, it was a pretty simple step up into Lattimore.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, it definitely was a very interesting transition. You know, the microcosm of the 4 clinics extrapolating to 35 clinics, so this has been an interesting experience, right? You know, when I came on, I had one biller that was maybe 50% part-time and was just fully reliant on, you know, technology to really do the rest. And so it was a whole new world when I came on to Lattimore and became the director of RCM. You know, I think just before I came on, they had 26 billers, you know, for 35 clinics. And the next question was like, well, when are we going to hire the next biller? And I was like, we can't just keep hiring billers. Like, these people don't even really exist, like these quality billers that really can do this. And so I think the process was really taking a step back for the first 3 months to understand how things were operating at that time, evaluating where the inefficiencies were, and then starting to tackle from a, you know, highest level to lowest level from a value perspective, where we could improve, which really in essence is a microcosm of what I did at Brownstone. Once I started to get data, right? We started with, okay, where are all our denials coming from? And then looked internally at first to say, where can we get better, tighter, and cleaner on the denials from? And we went from, I think we're like a 12% denial rate to a less than 1% denial rate over the course of 6 months, right? Through some large language learning models combined with some standard operating procedures internally, right? And so it really was doing the same thing again at a much larger scale, but also trying to figure out what everybody was doing and not how the technology could replace them, but how the technology could make them more efficient in their day, and how it can make us be cleaner and understand where our waste was, right? Like, where we were really leaking money, where the, you know, so to say, leaky bucket was, where we were not maximizing arrival rate, where we were losing on denials, where we were not fully collecting on PR and things like that. And so it was certainly at a much, much larger scale, right? And so, you know, now it's running reporting and pivoting tables for 35 clinics instead of 4 clinics, but it's really cool to see on a granular level, even with 35 clinics, of, okay, this clinic seems to be doing a little better with this insurance company versus this clinic. What's the differential in their CPT code workup and their mix of CPT codes when they see patients versus this clinic, and how do we maximize efficiency. And so all those things are really the same at a much, larger scale now. But again, the ability to really have real-time data, lifetime data at my fingertips to kind of pull and push levers has really been the key piece. I think it would have been a much, much harder challenge and a much, much more robust task if I was learning a brand new system, right? Like, luckily, I was going into an RCM product that I'd already been using for 2 years. I knew the kind of intricacies of, I knew the ins and outs of, I knew where to find things. And so that also inherently helped me build a little trust with the team because I knew where to find the reporting and things that they needed to find. And so I think it was a eye-opening experience to see how 35 clinics versus 4 felt and looked. But at the same time, it really was a microcosm of what we were doing, which I think speaks potentially to the scalability of the operating system, right? And so if you have an operating system that's giving you enough data and tight enough data, then it just becomes a larger scale reporting thing. And then you just pull different levers. So
it's amazing. So what does the future look like now? Lattimore as a whole, you and your role, like what are some things that you're looking forward to or some new initiatives that you guys are taking on?
Yeah. So, I mean, Lattimore's 35 clinics now. I think, from a business standpoint, my first mentor in business, which was my old boss, always told me, grow or die, right? If you're not growing, you're dying, right? And so I think, growth is certainly on the horizon. But whenever you grow, it's always a challenge between growth and quality, right? And so you can also always open another clinic and figure it out later, or grow as you have the right people in place to continue to push through the Lattimore way and the Lattimore difference and things like that. And so I think it's strategic growth now. I think it's making sure we're going and growing in the right markets in the right way and in a sustainable fashion. And I think, we're at a very interesting and cool point in the company that, we're almost all now on one system across the board from an EMR and RCM standpoint, which makes us very agile and very mobile to move to the next market when the opportunity becomes available. And it makes it very easy from a actual, administrative lift perspective to do. I think our next step really now is to really dial back into, like we were speaking earlier on, well, now how do we maximize the patient's experience, right? How do we provide them something different, right? We kind of talk about it half jokingly as, how do we make this the Disney World of PT? Like, how do we make it feel that seamless and make it feel that easy, right? I think ultimately I would love a world where the patient comes to their first appointment and they show up with nothing, right? They've already done all their paperwork. We already have their credit form payment on file. They already know their exact payment that they're going to have. They've already given us their script and it's been ingested in the system and everything like that. And they just show up and they don't have to worry about all the other things to get there. We've kind of, taken down all the barriers to entry for care, right? And made it a much simpler process. And they get a clinician that's not worried about being able to write down every single detail that they're the patient's trying to tell them, but rather is actively listening and engaging them in conversation because the AI is documenting for them and the AI is going to capture everything. We're not having to worry about what was that medication you said, what was that last name, and just getting everything down and, really putting the patient back at the center of the journey and letting them have a, experience that looks at their entire wellness, right? To really, okay, well, they're done with PT. Well, what's the next step? How do we continue to maintain their wellness and maintain this relationship? It's very interesting. People go to the dentist twice a year to get their teeth cleaned, but we don't take care of our bodies from a musculoskeletal standpoint like that. I think in a perfect world, we would have 2 wellness visits a year with our physical therapist or, whoever that person is for you to maintain and find any flaws before they really become problematic and injury laden. So I think that is our next, focus, as well as this kind of entire automation of the client management and administrative process to really minimize administrative burden, so that, you know, even our front desk person, and we call them client experience coordinators, isn't worried about what's in front of them on the screen and can greet the client with a smile and help them with their jacket, to put their jacket on and really get to know them. Like, they're as much a part of the patient experience as the physical therapist. And I think that's really our next step in hopefully not reinventing, because I think probably at one point, maybe even before I was really alive and aware of what was going on in the healthcare world, I think that is probably where healthcare started. But, you know, taking healthcare back to put the patient at the center, I think that's our next step, you know, as an organization.
So Disney World experience just without the lines.
Yeah, with no lines. Yeah, you don't have to wait in line. No, there is no waiting in healthcare, right? Just no barriers to entry. So.
Yeah. I think one of the on Scribe, I think we've been fortunate in that we've worked for a number of years to develop this, I think, incredible product together. And I think you have a front office, or not a front office, like a front row seat to now seeing 250 clinicians use Scribe every single day within Air. And, you know, our hope is that makes that patient journey just that much smoother, and you become more patient-centric. What's been some of the initial feedback and just comments you've heard, and in maybe your perspective as well using the product?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I first got my hands on the initial product probably almost, I guess it was almost 2 years ago now.
Early 2023, I think, yeah.
So a little less than 2 years. So, and, you know, it's continued to iterate and become better and better and better and become a more powerful tool. And so, but I think the first time I used it, I didn't really know what I was doing. But I walked into the room with a patient and I pressed record, and I didn't know what it was going to capture or what it wasn't going to capture. And, you know, I talked to the patient and had a conversation with the patient and walked out of the room and finished my song and dance and clicked done and waited to see what the note was going to spit back. And I was like, this is pretty good. This is probably better than what I would have wrote if I was writing all this down. And so I think I kind of took a minute to reflect on that. And I think the next thing I did was actually, I called Greg and I said, I think you just changed healthcare. Like, for the first time in 15 years, I actually just sat down, had a conversation with my patient, listened to my patient, made eye contact with my patient, actively engaged in a conversation about their health. And that was this kind of, you know, game-changing and moment-shifting experience where I was starting to feel like we were getting control back, to put the patient at the center and not having to worry about all the documentation pieces, and everything would be there. And so it's only gotten better and better, right? And so it's kind of become more iterative and more advanced, and now is really starting to look at, you know, conceptually building plans that are appropriate based on the patient's presentation. Interestingly enough, this morning, one of my physical therapists texted me and he said, you know, what's this thing doing? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, it's just writing plans that are getting really, really like good to the point where like it seems like it's reading literature or something. I said, yeah, it's starting to actually ingest peer-reviewed journal articles, understand based on patient presentations like how it should do that. And he was like, this is really incredible. And so, you know, he's also my PT that told me, if you ever get rid of this, I'm leaving, right? And so I think it's starting to give us the ability to really take care to the next level, in the sense that, you know, early in my career, and still now sometimes, when I finish a patient, sometimes I'll walk out of the room and I'll be like, I don't know. Like, I'm not really sure what's wrong here. And so before that was me picking up the phone to my mentor and saying, hey, look, this is what I got. I got this 46-year-old female presenting with these things. Like, what am I missing? What did I not think of, right? Because sometimes in the United States, this is getting much more prevalent now, we're the first person this patient's seen via direct access, right? And so we're sometimes being the first person to catch a systemic thing that's going on. You know, I think it was probably 5 years ago now that I had been treating this lady, and I'd known her for quite some time. She was a repeat patient of mine. And I just was like, something is off here. And she ended up having a benign pituitary tumor, right?
Jeez.
But like, but the ability now of, before I'd have to pick up my phone and it was me and my boss having a conversation with our 2 knowledge bases of what else could be going on, where now I can just plug the information in and say, run me a differential diagnosis for this patient, right? What am I missing? Like, what else? And that is a crazy powerful tool that is going to elevate the ability for our new grads to really see care in a different light. They have the hands-on skills when they graduate PT school, but this ability to really critically think and differentially diagnose everything they just saw in that room without missing things, right? It may, eventually get us to a point where we're elevating the care of our new grads, providing better care to everybody, but also getting to a point where we're getting more equitable healthcare for everybody, where everyone is having a very, very similar experience, right? PT is a little bit unique in that you could come into Greg's clinic and have low back pain, and he may diagnose you with, something similar to what I would diagnose you to, but the care you get and what you get next may be a little bit different, right? And that's very interesting because you would never go to the doctor's office. You take, 35 pediatricians across the country and you have a child with a sore throat go in. They're all going to get a strep culture, right? And if they have strep, provided they don't have an allergy to penicillin, they're probably all going to get penicillin and they're all going to get better in 3 to 4 days, right? We don't live in that world right now in the PT space, right? There is no real gold standard of, if someone comes in with a positive straight leg raise, with a reflex down, with myotomal weakness in the L4 myotome, this is your next step, right? Because for me, my next step is, oh shoot, we might have a problem here. I think we need a neuro consult before we keep treating you for 3 months and say, I guess you didn't get better. Go back to your doctor. And now your neurological weakness has been going so and so long. We can't fix that anymore, right? If all of a sudden we've changed the game and the differential can say, hey, hang on a minute. Here's a clinical nudge. You might want to consider referring this patient before you continue to treat them. Boy, is that us getting to a much, much better spot than we've ever gone to. And even from a treatment perspective, right? Like, hey, this patient has X, Y, and Z going on. Here's the, 7 key things that the peer-reviewed journal articles would indicate are the best evidence, right? We have all these clinical practice guidelines that are being put up by the APTA that are ingesting and doing, big, robust, studies on the data that's out there. But not everybody has time to ingest and read all that, and you don't have it at your fingertips all the time. If I can say, to the co-pilot or whoever, hey, give me the best clinical research for lateral epicondylitis, right? It may not be what it was 20 years ago, or even what they're learning in school, because in school they're teaching them so they can pass the boards. But the boards are 10 to 20 years behind clinical research, right? And so I think it's the next iteration we're seeing with Scribe right now. And I think, it's restoring work-life harmony. It's restoring the ability for the patient to be at the center of the journey. It's restoring the ability to give better care to people. But I think we're almost on the cusp now where it's going to actually start to improve the actual care that people are getting across the board.
It's amazing. Well, how's the feedback been from the patient side? Obviously, you talked a little about your providers. Any specific feedback while you're using Scribe during a patient encounter from the patient side?
I think the patient's biggest thought processes, and so it's unique in that I've been in practice for 15 years. I've been in the same clinic for 15 years. So, and I have some patients who I will see yearly for something will happen and they'll come in, right? And so they've seen me sit in front of a computer and jam, type as fast as I can when they're talking. And now they've seen me sit in front of the computer and say, oh, I'm not typing at all. And they'll say, you're not typing it, I'll write anything we're good, we got it. Like, we have an ambient listening thing happening right now. It's going to document it for us. And so they think it's pretty cool, right? They like the idea that they're getting my undivided attention and I'm not having to, peck away at my computer keys and things like that. And so overwhelmingly, it's been positive, right? I mean, I think there are some patients who don't like the concept of it, right? That are averse to technology and are averse to, devices listening to them. And then, in those cases, we just simply turn it off and we do it the old school way. And it's not as fun for me, but we still do it the way we used to, right? And so, but overwhelmingly, it's been interesting because even people who we thought were going to be very averse to it have been very open to it, right? It's almost becoming, standard of care and standard of practice. And I think my front end staff has now been going to different doctors and be like, yeah, they were using a scribe tool too. And so I think it's becoming pretty robust and almost accepted. But I think what the patients like the most about it is they feel like they're getting an experience where we're not just asking in the same 20 questions every single time to check and fill the boxes in the chart. They're telling me something and I'm saying, wait a minute, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that key piece, or tell me more about this key piece, which, not that I didn't want to do before, right? But I just didn't have the ability to do before because I was trying to get everything done in a finite time window.
What I think is really exciting is, when you have new innovation that comes out, or this is using language models, which have really only been prominent over the last 3 or 4 years, to make it so that in that time span, we've now made, as an industry, not just us, scribing and ambient technology a standard of care is incredibly quick within healthcare, right? I think there's a lot of industries that are still figuring out what that standard of care or that standard operating procedure for language models and AI is going to be. And healthcare, to your point, which is historically moved a little bit slower, is actually one of the fastest adopters to language models, right? And so I think it just shows you how powerful the tool is, and it's,
It's interesting, right? Because I think, I'm sure you guys have seen it in your, business, and I've seen it across mine too. It's not like some people want it. It's like all the providers want it,
yeah.
right? And I think that's probably what's really pushed it forward as quick as it has, and has let it, kind of grown like wildfire as quick as it has, is because we're all tired of doing the documentation and fighting the good fight and putting and trying to keep the patient at the center. And we're all tired of taking paperwork home at times and not spending time at our kids' t-ball game because we have to get our notes done, right? And so to give the provider a little bit of control back and give that back, I think that's really what's allowed it to grow, so rapidly and so fast. And it's really exciting to see. And like we said, I think, in my world, there aren't a lot of emergencies in the physical therapy space, right? But I think it's going to change some care in the emergency room even. We're like, wait a minute, like, you're missing something here. Like, hang on. Like, here's a clinical nudge. Like, this is what's happening with this patient. And I think I just read the other day, ChatGPT diagnosed some gene malformation or something of that other that doctors couldn't have diagnosed in 10 years or something like that, right? And so, again, I don't think the human experience remains paramount in the ability to care for people and at the heart of patient care. But being able to use technology to leverage technology to further improve the actual human experience they're getting, boy, I think that's where the magic happens, right? Now we have a clinician that's not so worried about what they're writing down and is actually focusing on the patient. That's where the magic happens, I think.
All right.
It's amazing.
Well, Matt, thanks so much for the time. We appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.
Perfect. Thanks so much, guys.